So good morning and welcome to PuzzleHR's Prioritizing Employee Mental Health and Wellbeing January Symposium. We're really excited to have everybody here. My name is Kim Etchells and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships with PuzzleHR. I am excited to be a part of the conversation on mental health and well-being, and I'm honored to be joined by one of my favorite technology partners, BambooHR, for the discussion. We're fortunate enough to have Kelsey Tarp lead us through a very important topic today. Kelsey, just to give you guys a little bit of a background, has a little over a decade of HR experience and expertise. She's earned both a Bachelor's of Art in English Literature and Language and MBA in Leadership from the University of Washington. She also has a Certificate of HR Management from the University of Washington and a Certificate of Strategic HR Leadership from Cornell University. Her career has been intertwined mainly with HR tech companies in the industry. Amazon was one, Salesforce was another. And last year, she joined BambooHR as a human resource leader and business partner. Kelsey, we are thrilled to have you, your knowledge and your expertise. I mean, it definitely sounds like you are the right person to have this conversation with today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. No pressure at all. No, I think it's a good invitation. I'm excited to be here. And I think we've got a really interesting topic that's top of mind. You were talking a little bit at the beginning about like what day of the week it is. I am very much there. Like, how are we already at the end of January? But I think like many people, this topic is probably really relevant if you're in our busy season. I know for me, we're right in the middle of performance and comp cycles. And so I think it's a really important topic all the time, but maybe especially now when we're often in our times of intensity.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like this topic has, especially over the last few years since COVID and changing where we're working from and how we're working, I think this topic has grown in more and more people are affected potentially by this in some way, shape, or form. And so I agree with you. I think it's incredibly relevant. And I think it's something that we are increasingly have to deal with and talk about and navigate, as people are trying to adapt and kind of figure out what their new norm is. And, by now you would think that that's happened, but I think that there's constantly been curveballs thrown our way. So maybe not so much.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, over the years, mental health and well-being has continued to be a hot topic. A lot of people are talking about it. And as we were just, mentioning, it's increasing, I think, in conversations and need and the rate of the way that the conversations that we need to be having. So let's talk a little bit about that. And we're just going to let everybody know there's a couple of polling questions we're going to throw out there. So we're going to throw the first one out there at the top of the conversation and get some conversation going, a side conversation going. And then we're going to go ahead and jump in. So that first polling question should be coming out to you guys soon. But let's talk a little bit just about mental health and burnout. I feel like burnout is kind of, it's so relevant and it is so many people are experiencing that, whether it's with employees that report to them or themselves. And it's tough. It can be tough to diagnose it. It can be tough to talk about it. It can be tough to address it because it's one of those things that just kind of sits out there and we know it's there, but we're not really quite sure what it is or how to deal with it. So let's first start off with defining burnout. So how is burnout defined? What does that definition look like?
Sure. I think it's always a really helpful place for us to start. Like, what are we talking about specifically? Because I agree with you. It's a term that people throw out from time to time, and often it's a description people have when they're overwhelmed or experiencing work stress. But I always like to ground myself in the definition first. So I'll pivot to the World Health Organization definition. So they defined it in 2019, and they characterized burnout as a symptom or a syndrome resulting from chronic, unmanageable workplace stress. So I think that's a good thing for us to start with. Like, right, it's chronic, so it's ongoing and it's persistent. There are three symptoms that define it. So 1, feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion. 2, mental distance from your job and feelings of kind of negativity or cynicism toward the job. And three, kind of a sense of ineffectiveness and a lack of accomplishment. I always think of that kind of like diminishing returns, right? Like the more I throw at it, I'm not getting more out of it. And I feel like I'm just kind of spinning out in mud. And I don't know about you, but when I look at that definition or I think about it, I can think about times in my career where I've experienced all of those, either individually or all three at the same time. And if we can think about it, it's very likely the members of our team can too. And so I think when we ground in that definition, each of those attributes might have a different way we go about solving it and thinking about systems and mechanisms that could help be effective in our teams. But I think the definition is really important. Like you have these three patterns going on simultaneously, and they affect every person in a different way.
Yeah, it's so true. And I too can think of times, same thing as you, where I've either experienced one or all three of those.
Yeah.
And it really impacts not only professionally, but my personal relationships, my family, my health. I find, I gain weight and then I feel sluggish and then I feel even more brain fog, and it gets really, really hard to do the basic things and find enjoyment even in those basic things because it bleeds over into my personal.
Yeah. No, I've had the exact same experience, and we'll talk about it a little bit more too. But I think knowing yourself is a really good place to start. I know we're here to talk about our team members and the organizations that we help shape and create, but I think your own self-awareness is so important. Like when I think about that the negativity or cynicism, like for me, I always call it my inner serpent. I get like a very innocuous request, and I'm like, there's self-service resources on it. And the moment I know that I'm reacting that way, I'm like, oh, that's a sign, right? Like I have a disproportionate reaction to something that's going on. Yeah. And I know for me that that's a sign that I'm on a path I don't want to be on. But again, I've learned that because I know myself and I've been able to watch these signals. But I think I would really look at that definition and look back at how you've been spending your time the last couple of months and say, hey, were there any activities or times where I might have hit some of these? And what did I do to either get myself out of that state, or what were some of the ways that I could have tended to it earlier? All of those are good ways for us to know ourselves, because we have to be well to support our organizations being well.
It's so true. My mother always says you can't give water from an empty well, right? Yeah. So if we are depleted and we're feeling that, then it's impossible to give that to those of us around us. And I think oftentimes we take on so much. Setting boundaries sometimes is incredibly difficult to do, but necessary. And it can be really hard. Number one, to identify it, to be self-aware enough, like you said, your inner serpent, right? Like, and somebody said they're stealing that, which I love.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I love that. But being able to identify that is so important. And I find, when I was younger, I would go down that rabbit hole, right? It would start, and then I would just it was like piling on, and well, this is not working, and this is a problem, and I got all this I have to do, and I can't get it all done, and I'm tired, and I'm this, I'm that. And so it just, it really took a long time for me to mature enough and become self-aware enough to really be able, like you, to identify, okay, I'm going down that hole, and I need a break. I need to step away. I need to go for a walk. Sometimes I need to take the rest of the day off because I am no good right now with the work I'm putting out. The output is not good. I am not good for me. I'm not good for the people reporting to me. I'm not good for the people that I have to report to, or the work that needs to be done. I can't be there. So I think for me, it's very similar, but it took me a long time. And I still find that I sneak back into those moments where
not perfect.
Yeah. I'm just not quite on top of it, right? Yeah. And so I indulge a little, and I shouldn't, but it really, the more that I talk about this is struggle, or this is a problem, or this is difficult, the more deeper I get. So trying to mentally control that brain and wrap my head around it and say, okay, we're not going to have those internal conversations, because I literally talk to myself all day long. Like I can hear myself talking to myself all day long, if that makes any sense. I know it's a little crazy, but really trying to wrap my head around, like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I know what's starting to happen. It's not healthy. It's not going to help the situation. I'm not going to feel better. I need to just step away, take a break, do something, change something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that the comments on your inner monologue, like that's for me where I hear that cynicism, right? Like if I hear my inner monologue going, here we go again, that's so different than like, oh no, it happened again. Like this person needs help. That's where I
Yep.
want to be responding from. But if I'm on the, here we go again path,
Yep.
I know that that's a signal for me that I need to take care of myself first. I saw something in the comments about putting on your own oxygen mask.
Yep.
The meta theme and what we're talking about today. But like, as we've talked through this, I hope you're able also to think and reflect a little bit. You might have folks that are earlier on in their career journey or earlier on in recognizing some of these symptoms in their own work performance. And they might get to a point that's a little bit more difficult. Like they might advance in a stage of burnout that could have been attended to earlier had they had more awareness of the signs. And so I think that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. What are ways that we as HR practitioners can kind of help keep an eye on the health of our organization while also making sure we're role modeling those behaviors ourselves.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that's kind of a great segue to the next question. So it can be tough, as we just discussed, to identify burnout for ourselves and for other people. It really can be tough to do that. So how do you recommend HR professionals help managers or leaders recognize the signs of burnout within their employees? Because if we're having a hard time recognizing it with ourselves, it's got to be way more difficult to recognize it externally. So how do you identify that? What are some ways you can identify it?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think you can think through. So one, I think we found a stat that I thought was just interesting. So a recent Gallup survey found that 28% of people said that they're burned out. So a little more than 1 in 4. That's a pretty significant amount of folks. And so those are people who are able to have the words and language around it, right? And we've already talked about how challenging that might be. So my suspicion is you've got 1 in 4 likely burned out, and it could be even more. When I think about what's happened in the last, we talked at the beginning, right, about how strange time is happening or has happened and how people are resetting to so many versions of normal. I also think about how people bring with them habits, practices, norms from other places that they may have worked that maybe aren't authentic to your culture, but people are bringing with them a life and experience into new roles at your organization. And so we also know that people might have experiences that shape quite a bit of burnout in them that may take some time to recover from as they're new to your organization. We also know that dynamics within organizations change, right? People leave, people need leave coverage, right? All sorts of things can happen that help create a higher likelihood of burnout. And when I think about signals that I look for, somewhere around like deadlines and norms around deadlines, are we finding that we're setting realistic deadlines for projects and milestones and transformations? Are we finding that we're scoping those issues appropriately and really being realistic about the time to do the change well? When I think about things that, again, I know for me, our burnout triggers, coordination neglect is a really big one where we have all the pieces of a project and then we try to put them together and no one thought about the pieces fitting together. The puzzle doesn't fit. Funny for a puzzle.
Yeah.
But like coordination neglect can be really hard because you're at 85% of the way and like, we thought these pieces would come together and they don't. Diffusion of responsibility is another one where everyone thinks it's someone else's responsibility and something important doesn't get done. Like, how are we thinking about how the work gets accomplished? And are there opportunities for us to really look at all the bodies of work going on simultaneously and say, hey, is this reasonable? My intention today is give you both kind of big picture and practical advice. When I think about managing this in client groups, I literally will sit down with a business partner and go, all right, let's just like whiteboard out really quick what's going on at the same time. And when we start to think about what is running the business, so as an example, in our revenue org, we have new comp plans becoming effective February 1st. So we think about like, okay, comp plans being effective. We had people moving to different segments. Oh, we've got a couple of new leaders joining, right? When we start to outline everything that's going on simultaneously, and then we also think about, all right, and then we've got performance, and then we've got compensation planning. When I put all of them together, sometimes you look at it and go, wow, that's a lot going on simultaneously. Yeah. And then the next question we need to ask ourselves, is all of it essential and is all of it reasonable? And I think sometimes we look at each of those things in isolation, but when we look at that big picture of everything that's going to go on and impact the people and impact the leaders, that's where we can take a hard look at deadlines and expectations and say, hey, are these creating an environment where people can do all of this well, or are they likely not being set up to succeed? I also think about what's the culture in your organization. Is this a culture where, like, past deadlines are no big deal. Errors are no big deal. When we have tension between team members, we use hope as a strategy and like hope it gets better. Those are all things that can be signals for you as you have a pulse on your organization of what's likely to contribute to burnout for your team members, and what's going on in what pockets is really where you can start to think about what intervention might make sense, right? If we think about missed deadlines or errors, you would maybe think about like a root cause analysis and thinking through how we develop training or enablement so leaders can create a different environment. That's a totally different problem to solve than people having avoidance of difficult conversations. And so you know these organizations well and really start to think through what signals you're seeing. But I think those are some of the ways that burnout can help burnout manifest in our organizations. But ultimately, you can also look at your employee data. Employees who are burned out are 63% more likely to take a sick day. So is your time off and unplanned time off especially looking different? What do you see in your data? Are there teams or pockets where perhaps people are taking more unplanned time away? And is that a signal of burnout? They're more likely to visit the emergency room. I know all of us are thinking about how are we good stewards of our company's financial resources, and those kinds of expenses in our medical plans can often be quite expensive. Like, what are we seeing in terms of aggregate insights? But most importantly, people who are burned out are 2.6 times more likely to seek another job. What are you seeing in terms of regrettable attrition in your organization, and how does that help you keep a pulse on where you might have some parts of the business that really need your support?
Yeah. Wow. That was fantastic. There was so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
And so many things that I didn't think about. You know, when you start to think about how are you identifying it, you kind of go to the old standbys. Okay. Like the deadline missing that you had mentioned. Okay. Or the engagement, or maybe the turnover. But there was a lot more in there. And I just want to touch back on a couple of things. So one of the things you had said was, you know, fitting the puzzle pieces together. So everybody's got their own, you know, their marching orders and what they need to do and their own requirements. And then when you sit down to fit it all together, and it's not coming together because there wasn't that communication, that engagement, that project overlay. So something like that is something I would never think of, you know, when I'm talking about burnout and leading causes of, but it is so relevant. It is one of those things that just kind of, it's like the penny at the bottom of your shoe, right? You're stepping on it and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, but it's not that big a deal. And then it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then you build a blister, and then it becomes a problem, right? Yeah. So I think that is really, really important. Most definitely. Interesting facts about medical. You know, people picking out the medical, you know, being at the hospital more, needing those things. I mean, that's very interesting and very relevant as well. And then, you know, of course, you've got those outliers, the turnover, and, you know, all of those things, which can be hard to identify when you're in the middle of it. You know, it's one of these things. Oh, so-and-so left. Okay. Yep. Oh, so-and-so left. Okay. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're 3 or 4 in, and now you're like, wait a minute, what's happening here? You know, we need to take a step back and take a look, because there's clearly something going on. The problem is not, and identifying the right problem. The problem is not necessarily the employee and it wasn't a good fit. It's, are we not the good fit? Are we creating an environment where, you know, this kind of thought process is happening and these decisions are being made because we, as you mentioned, with financially, but we're not being good stewards of the business and leadership and management and development. So I think there is a lot there. And I think that's what makes this so tricky, is that there are so many different areas that you can look towards and you need to look towards and be on top of and be aware of, that they could be signs. And then you have to be able to diagnose the problem correctly. And so it's, you know, it could be any number of things, but having the skill set to be able to sit down, separate a little bit, take a step back and identify what the true problem is. Yeah.
When I think of objectively looking at the data is tough, right? Like I think about like exit surveys or exit interviews. You might have someone that was like, we are not creating a sustainable environment. I had no choice but to feel burned out, right? Like you see that. Or you might see something that's a little bit more innocuous and you have to kind of put your detective hat on and start to piece the pieces together. And they might talk about how deadlines change frequently and they felt like they weren't set up for success. Or despite talking to their manager, there was very limited flexibility and they just felt like they couldn't integrate work in their life, right? Like what it looks like might come in different flavors, but you're really looking for those meta themes of what environment are we creating and is it sustainable?
Right. So interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so now we've identified what burnout is, right? And some precursors and some things that we need to be looking for. So can anything be done to help avoid burnout? I mean, I know you mentioned, some things, but they were, I think some of those were offensive, but a lot of that was defensive. It's after the problem has started. So what and can anything be done to help avoid burnout more specifically?
Yeah. I think another big challenge about burnout is deeply personal, right? Like I think about for me, it's not necessarily about the hours I'm putting in, it's what's in those hours. And if I'm working on things that I find energizing and challenging in a good way, those hours feel really different to me than hours where I'm like, oof, this is not the kind of work that I find, this is the kind of work I find draining, or I question like, what's the point? Why are we doing this? Right. And so I think that like the kind of work really matters, and everybody else has a different life outside of work, right? The workload might be totally fine, but someone might be dealing with like an elder care scenario that's really difficult, and that might put more stress on their work that maybe hasn't changed. And so I think it's important for us to remember there's very rarely a one size fits all anything in HR, but I think particularly for burnout, because it's so personal, the key and the leverage point is really people leaders and equipping them and enabling them to help have meaningful conversations about people's work experience and what we can do to make it better. I would also think through what impact we can have with respect to like role clarity and communication throughout the org. Also having a really good strategy for your employee listening mechanism. So when you have people complete surveys, what are we doing with those results? Like as HR practitioners, we deserve high quality, helpful results to help us transform organizations when we have a pattern of taking the feedback and closing the loop and making meaningful improvements about it. And we know that we don't do that in isolation. We do that with our leaders. We make sure that they're engaged in that feedback just as much as we are. But if you don't have those muscles yet, that's a really important place to start, I think, to get a sense for a pulse of the organization and what people are finding to be pain points. But another stat that really surprised me, only 60% of people have a strong understanding of their boss's expectation. So again, in a group of 5, 2 of them don't know their boss's expectations.
Wow.
And then the workers who are not that confident in their relationship with their manager, which would make sense because you're not really clear on their expectations, are 70%. So people who are confident in that are 70% less likely to burn out. So again, I think managers are an inflection point. How do we help them throughout the employee life cycle? Be really clear about what we expect from different parts of the role. Make sure that we're really clear about how we set them up for success and how we measure success. All of those things contribute to people feeling confident and where they're focusing their energy and effort. Because I don't know about you, my inner serpent comes out when I'm doing things that ended up being dead end work, where I do it and I go, wait, that wasn't even needed, or wait, I spent way more time on that versus its relative importance, right? How can we help people put their time, effort, energy, and passion against things that really matter for the business? I think the real nugget there is role clarity for people leaders. But we also can think about the kinds of culture we're shaping. Like, are we having a culture where people get frequent, helpful, actionable feedback? Are there regular one-on-ones where leaders are checking in on their folks, both professionally and personally? How are you doing? What does support from you look like? That can be a huge unlock for people leaders to have dialogue with their employees that helps elevate whether or not someone's able to deliver in an environment that's productive for them. And then I also kind of go, like, as a business partner, there's another motto that I like to follow, which is where there's a cape, there's a problem. And so when I see signs of heroism, when I see signs like, this person saved the day once again, or we have a person that's like a single point of failure, or we're constantly lauding them as, if we were without this person, we would be in a terrible bind. Oftentimes those are places where your org design or your resourcing isn't quite appropriate. And we're also rewarding behaviors that probably aren't healthy for our organization long-term. And so I would also look for signs of heroics, right? Those are tending to be hotspots in the organization where you can really start to say, like, have we scoped this appropriately? And if we are putting a particular person in a spot where their job function is at risk if something were to happen. Like I always think about that. And those are often signals too, that we might have a hotspot of burnout in a particular part of the organization. But, on the whole, we can help influence leaders and decision makers to think about the environment and the culture that we're creating. So headcount is one where I think we can always lean in and think through, where do we get persistent signs that our resources aren't enough? Or when we look at what we want to accomplish in a particular line of business, where do we go, with the resources we have, I think we need more and we need to really advocate for more. Thinking about the mental health resources we offer our teams, EAPs are probably your most common form, but what do we offer? How easy is it to navigate? Those are always things I recommend people check out. Thinking about, again, what do we prioritize in our business, and what are we okay with being, like, what are we striving to be awesome at? And what are we okay with being serviceable at? That's a question that I talk about in my team often that can really help us diagnose where we want to put our effort and make sure it's aligned to business priorities. But I would also go back to recognition, right? If you are recognizing heroics, what you're doing in the organization is shaping that heroics or what good looks like. Heroics are often done in ways that are not sustainable. And so I would also take a really hard look at recognition. You get more of what you reward and recognize. And ultimately, is that what you want to recognize in your business? Do you want more of it?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So where there's a cape, there's a problem. Interesting. I never thought about that, but it's so true, right? It can be so true. So that's really interesting. You've now mentioned twice about role clarity and how key that is and how important that is in really defining what the job is, having a very clear understanding of what needs to be done to execute that job and what the priorities are. So that's come in now twice in this conversation, which is one of those things like, okay, this is really important. This is something we need to pay attention to. You also talked a little bit about, the employee, like listening to your employees and truly hearing what they're saying. I remember I saw a speaker talking about a company that it was a tech company, and they had, all sorts of, they had a game room and they had a hot tub and they had a workout and all these fun things. And the CEO was walking through one day and heard there were people I guess they'd worked out and they had a hot tub in there, like a sauna or hot tub. And he was walking by and the people were complaining, sitting in the hot tub, complaining about the company and their job. And his first reaction was, they're sitting in a hot tub at work complaining about work, like about their job. Like, this is crazy. We give them all these things and they're not even grateful for it. And they went back and sat down and the things that you're talking about, the clarity in the job, getting value, understanding your roles, understanding, how to work and what's important. Those were the things that they were missing because they just said, we're going to give you all these fun things and we're not really going to do anything about defining what you're actually doing.
Yeah. I believe culture is a shared understanding of what's okay and not okay in an organization. Yeah, their definition I like to use is culture is what you reward and recognize minus the worst behaviors you tolerate. But none of those talk about pool tables and none of those talk about ping pong. And I do think that ultimately people choose cultures that resonate for them, whether that's the values or the mission or people they might know who work there, who they know share a similar work ethos. But like why you join and why you stay, you might join because you're like, I've worked in places that have, I love the basketball game or like I like, don't get me wrong, like I'll take a free yogurt or hummus and carrots from the fridge. Like I love bubbly water. I will do those things all day. But I also care more about having a manager that like sees me as a person and really values what I bring to the table, or I value being informed about things that impact my work versus finding out, right? Like those are all things that are part of your culture too. And while people might appreciate some of those flashy things, I think they're a side dish for the main dish, which is really having a clear role, knowing how what you does impacts the broader organization and accelerates the mission. Those are things that are durable and tend to really matter across all kinds of employees.
Yep, I agree. I think it's a little bit of lust, right?
Yeah.
It's the pizzazz, the sparkles in the beginning, but the sparkles are not sustainable.
Yeah.
That's not going to fill you. That is not going to keep you motivated and keep you engaged in doing your job.
Yeah.
So they're the nice to have, not the need to
Yeah.
have. So yeah, to be effective in your position, right? And not experience the burnout. So interesting. Okay, very,
Yeah.
very cool. So is there anything you can recommend to employees to help recognize burnout in themselves? You and I have talked about how it's taken us a little bit to be
Yeah.
self-aware and figure out what these things are and to be able to identify when we're going down, the serpent has come out or we're going down that black hole. So what are some things that they can do to help employees can help do to help recognize that within themselves? Like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
starting to.
Yeah, I think one is just normalizing conversations about it. So again, I always believe that this stuff is most effective when it's built into how you run your business versus kind of bolted on the side. And what employee communication mechanisms do you have? Do you have town halls? Do you have a newsletter? How can you have a corner dedicated to thinking about things that matter to our organization? And if mental health matters to your organization, I hope it does. How can we give it some real estate? And how can we help people help themselves by connecting to tools and resources that you likely already have in your organization? But I think helping people recognize some signs and also helping people leaders recognize some signs, those might be lower productivity, right? Like someone is just really struggling to deliver like they normally do. They're missing deadlines. Again, those kind of go together, but really helping leaders spot those and say, hey, like this is a little bit unusual for you. What's going on? Opening up the conversation. Increased tension at work. If you notice between two team members or people who are parts of different cross-functional teams, things normally run smoothly and all of a sudden they're not. That might be a sign someone's serpent is coming out, and we'd want to get to the root of why that's happening and how we might help address it in the future. Lack of enthusiasm for work. I know, like when you know your people really well, you start to get a sense for what's going on in the organization that is impacting them personally. And if you have someone who normally is like, I'm on it, I'm so excited to dig into this project, and they're like, yeah, I'll when I get a chance, I'll try to, you can tell. You can tell. And encouraging managers to like see something and say something, right? Like you notice these signs and you initiate an open-ended conversation. You can say, listen, I'm under no impression I have all the context, but like, I've noticed this. I wanted to check in. Like, how are you doing with it? I wanted to make sure we had an open dialogue about it. And also just difficulty concentrating. Again, when I go back to like lower productivity, missed deadlines, do you have someone who's normally, tying all the bows, finishing up projects to completion, and instead they've got like 6 things 35% done? That might be a signal that they need some help or they might need some support prioritizing. Right. And then I think, again, encouraging people. So like they're seeing these signals in themselves. People leaders are seeing these signals in their team members. So what? What do we do from here? I think like encouraging people to have open dialogue with their people leader, that matters. I think that's most impactful. I know that from time to time, people also say, oh, reach out to HR. Well, you're welcome to reach out to me. I will need to talk to your leader to understand what's going on. And so I think people talking to their leader and maybe their leader's leader, that can also often be the most effective. And then think about how we use our time away and actually unplug from work for a little minute. That has been learning for me. Because I used to fight it. And I was like, no, I know that I'm going to need to have so many things when I come back. It's better for me just to grind through it. I'm not proud of this and I'm on the other side of it. But you talked about your inner monologue before. Mine used to be, diamonds are made under pressure. That was not good. Like that. No, that was not good.
That is not good. Yeah.
That was not good. But that's what I told myself. And I was like, no, I am not going to take any time off. I'll just grind through this. And I had so many diminishing returns because I would have late nights, early mornings, and my work quality was not as good. I was making mistakes. I was foggy. I was better when I took some time to meaningfully step away and then come back with a fresh perspective. And that was a lesson that took me multiple years to learn, but I'm on the other side of it. And I think, how can we help people learn that faster and have norms on our organizations where it's okay to unplug and take a long weekend and people are going to cover for you. You're not expected to be on call or available. And then again, expectations with managers, role clarity. We've talked about that already, but I think that's a really important component. And then thinking about the holistic total rewards your company offers. how can we help people think about all the different dimensions of wellness, whether that's their financial wellness? Does your benefits program offer something related to financial wellness that might be generating stress for your team members? What about their physical health? Are we thinking about things that can help them, whether it's, having a gym on site or having fitness classes or even just having norms in the organization where people are talking about their health and wellness? Do you have things for their mental health? I know at Bamboo, we just rolled out like a Headspace membership for our team members. It's been super well.
Wow. Yep.
People are really, really excited.
Yep.
But that was part of our listening strategy, right? People said, listen, we have an EAP and that's great. I want something in my hand. Like I want something I can go to for 10 minutes to reset and recenter. Awesome. Like how can we use our listening strategy to think about what people are saying they need and what we might be able to offer? But ultimately, like wellness is, and you can Google it, right? There's so many different ways to think about wellness and so many different dimensions of wellness. But if we neglect some parts, it's very unlikely that we're creating an ecosystem in our total rewards offerings for people to be fully well in ways that matter to them, because everyone has different needs.
Yeah, agreed. So there were two things that you said that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
All great information. The first one was the disconnecting.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that is a real, true issue with a lot of people. I think some of that was made even worse with COVID when we started working from home because there was no separation of work and personal. That line got blurred considerably. Yeah. And so I've always been the type of person, though, that has been like, okay, same as you, I know I'm going on vacation. I'm going to bring my laptop. I'll get in a call here. I can do this. And then I sit down and I start doing it. And before I know it, it's taken me 5 days to finally start to relax. And now I'm leaving the next day.
I'm getting on my plane to go home. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And what did I get out of that? I lost being present with my family. I lost the experience of what I was doing. I lost the ability to refill my well or put my oxygen mask on, right, first. So I lost all of those things. And for what? My boss was telling me, I got this, you go do what you need to do. But I could not, that constant need to make sure that I'm doing a good job and that I'm performing the way I need to be performing. Yeah. And so for me, there's two sides of it. There's the corporate side, which is the clarity, the role clarity, the definition, the prioritizing. And then there's the personal side of this and me feeling like I have to stay on top of all of these things when even though my boss is telling me I don't, I'm not listening to that, right? Yeah. And so that has been very hard for me as well. And I find it still is hard for me. I still have to, I had a family emergency last week and had to take some time off, but I was still checking my email every chance that I got. And I mean, it was a significant reason for me not to be working, but I was still doing it. Right? Yeah. And I think that as, what we don't understand is that is coming at the detriment of our performance, increasing burnout, satisfaction, joy, happiness, all of those things. And so really designating that time to take a break and take a step back and holding yourself to, this is not rocket science. Nobody is going to die. I can disconnect for a few days and it will be okay. Nothing's going to, the company is not going to come to an end because I didn't answer an email. Yeah. Right. So I think that is key. And that really resonates with me because that's still something I struggle with and does cause burnout. I go through phases where, I come back from my vacation and I'm exhausted. And now I have to dive in and do all the other little things that I didn't get done while I was on vacation. And I'm not prepared for it. I'm not mentally prepared for it, right? Or even physically because I'm tired. No. And then the other thing I wanted to mention to you too that you said that I thought was so important is, a lot of companies will offer EAP services or have an HR or say to go to HR like you mentioned. But at the end of the day, I think it's some of those ways that we are told to communicate or the employee thinks to communicate is not the way that they're normally communicating. So you guys got a Headspace, got access to Headspace, which is fantastic. That's meeting people where, like you said, it's on my phone. I download it. I can just go in, boop, 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 and do what I need to do, have a conversation, set up a meeting, set up an appointment, whatever. I think it's the accessibility. When I think back to when I was younger and they're like, I'm like, oh, we have this wellness thing, but it's like, okay, well, where is it? What do I need to do? And I've got to, not understanding what it is and then not having it be simple to access. It just is like, I'm already underwater and now I've got to sit here and figure out how to get access to this or use this or what I am entitled to, what I can have access to. Yeah. And I think that can be really tough, if companies are not very clear and don't offer things in easily digestible, actionable items. You know what I mean? If it's like, we have this great thing and there's this website, but then you got to go onto the website and where's the website address?
Log in. What's my group number?
Exactly. I got to reset my password because I don't remember what it is. And now I got to wait. And now another email came in. Let me go do that. And then I put
What's your employee ID?
Exactly. Okay.
I hope everything's okay with your family situation. But I wanted to give you just like a little nugget that might be helpful. I always remind myself, whether I'm intending to or not, I am role modeling for my team what's okay and not okay. So if I am taking time away and I'm not disconnecting, the message I'm sending to them is, I expect you to do that too. Yep. And I don't want that for them. I want that for them 0%. And so I have really viewed my time away as a chance for other people on my team to step up and say like, you are me for the weekend, or like, right, you're me for this Friday. I took 2 weeks of time off last May, and I deleted Slack from my phone, would recommend. And I didn't check anything. I had people that knew how to get a hold of me if they needed to, and there was truly an emergency. But like, get really clear about what's an emergency. Like I've experienced them, right? Like from time to time, you have something super unfortunate happen, like an employee death, right? Like hopefully those are very rare. And like, there are times where there are real emergencies that we really need to make sure we get everyone together. But otherwise, I've got people on my team who aspire to more, whether they want to take on a leadership position or they want to cover different kinds of clients. Like, give them the opportunity to shine. When your people shine, you shine as a leader. And I do not want my people checking the stuff when they're gone. Like, so that has been the fuel for my little tank, if that's helpful. Like, I don't want to role model that for them.
That's so important. And somebody said in the chat, 100% it starts with the leaders, and she's right, and you're right. Yeah. And if you don't do it for yourself, do it for those of you that are reporting to you, right? So that you can, like you said, you can model that good behavior. I totally agree. Okay, we're going to roll out the second polling question, so that's going to come out to everybody. You guys should see that in a second. And then let's talk a little bit about building resilience in workplace culture. What exactly does that look like? How does HR impact that? Like, talk to me a little bit about resilience.
Yeah. And again, I think like burnout, resilience looks different for different people. First of all, we need to recognize that in our businesses, there are times of intensity. We talked at the beginning, right? I'm up to my eyeballs in compensation and talent planning. This is not something I'm doing all the time. This is part of the rhythm of the business, and it's cyclical. And so I like to look first, though, are we creating times of intensity one after another? Like, are there never peaks and troughs in the business? And that can sometimes be a signal that we're making it really difficult for people to demonstrate resilience because it's one thing after another. So again, looking at all the things going on simultaneously, it's not super classy or cute, but I like either whiteboard it or I do it in like a quick Google sheet and just start to like look at all these things stacked together and see how many things are going on simultaneously. I also use the product term like t-shirt sizing, right? Is this a small thing? Is this an extra large thing? And if I look at it and I go, hot dog, we've got 6 extra larges going on in the next 6 weeks. That team might need some help. Or like, is that reasonable? Is that viable? Like helping us understand what's actually going on and grounding ourselves in the kind of work being done can help us understand, like, sure, it's great for people to develop resilience. Are we creating an environment where you need more resilience than the average bear? So I think that's important for us to really think about. But again, part of resilience is helping the team have clear outcomes and expectations and role clarity in what they need to do during times of intensity. And if we do that, we can expect a couple of outcomes. So one is better retention and also better job candidates. We know that people will join us and stay with us when what we promise to candidates in the process is matching what they experience on the job. So as an example, if a huge part of your employee value proposition is talking about work-life balance or being family friendly, and then you aren't those things, that's
Right.
creating a dissonance that's going to be really hard for you to attract and engage people who stay with you long term, because what they were looking for doesn't match their lived experience in the job. But ultimately, it's about productivity, right? People are able to put their time and effort against things that really matter in the business. And we really recommend thinking through how you're shaping a culture that attracts and retains people who are really excited and energized about your mission and want to get it done through your values. And so if you really care about productivity as an example, that should be reflected in your values and mission. What you say to your employees about what's important should have a through line into these different things so people know what they're signing up for. And then they experience that once they join and stay in your organization. But I kind of think about it like if we want a really resilient culture, we need to look at our mission and values and highlight what we want, things that can contribute to resilience, positivity. We focus on what's good. We recognize our successes and we celebrate those. For you to have resilience, you need to have really good communication, conflict avoidance, like we talked about. Probably not the key in a highly resilient organization, right? We address problems head on and we address them timely. Talking about focusing on what you can control. I personally believe in what I call participating in my own rescue. Like, how do we help people be part of the solution and enable them with the critical thinking and problem solving skills so that they can improve whatever piece of the puzzle they're responsible for in the organization and have their fingerprints on it being successful. These are all things that come back to kind of fundamental skills we can help look for when we're recruiting. And then also ways that we can signpost throughout our organization that this is something that really matters to us because it's critical for us achieving our mission.
Yep. Awesome. So let's talk then about, and you mentioned a few of those. So, what other things can HR teams do that maybe are struggling with resilience or ways to improve resilience?
Yeah, I would start with the data, right? Like you want to get a pulse on your team. Do people think that we have a resilient culture? Do they think that, we bounce back quickly from setbacks, that we engage in active problem solving? I would look at my employee listening strategy and get a sense for like, where am I either directly or indirectly getting signals on those things? And how am I going to keep a pulse on how those are being measured over time? Where do people think that we could do better? Again, like we talked about for exit interviews or feedback when people are leaving the organization, sometimes you have to be a little bit of a detective and like start to understand what are some of the maybe more indirect ways that can point to a lack of resilience or an opportunity to build more resilience in the team. I was listening to a really interesting podcast. It's called The Anxious Achiever. So if you are looking for a new podcast to subscribe to, But they were talking about, there was one about folks in a call center. And one of the things that spiked people's spiked their anxiety most significantly was on the other side of a call, you never knew what you were going to get. And so what they started to do is in a call center environment, what they started to do was just put people on different kinds of customer concerns and implemented more call routing. And the uncertainty was what was making people so uncomfortable. And they found that people, they had better retention, they had less absenteeism. People were reporting more job satisfaction from a simple change of, hey, we used to give you all sorts of different kinds of calls, and now we're segmenting you into a couple of different kinds of. So you're reducing ambiguity. And you know that people are generally going to get topics that fit into some of the categories that are most frequently asked for customers. Small change, big impact. Are there opportunities like that for you to really look in your organization and make tweaks to how the work is distributed or ways people are approaching the work, so that they can just have some of these environments to actually support their resilience and support their success. But there's lots of things that impact your culture ultimately. Things like your recognition, your norms around work-life balance, whether or not you have a propensity, again, to reward and recognize like last minute scrambles and heroics versus do we reward and celebrate projects that go really smoothly and everyone hits their milestones and it was low drama, right? Like I would really all these different artifacts of your culture and say, what are making deposits toward the kind of organization we want to be? What are making withdrawals toward that? And how do I start to get my deposits added up more meaningfully?
Yeah, that's so interesting because again, it goes back to the Kate problem, right?
Yeah.
So we tend to recognize and celebrate, wow, we pulled that one out. Like that was a tough one. And this person came in and that person. And there is very little recognition or acknowledgement when it does go smoothly, which is the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, we're supposed to all be doing our jobs, so well and understand them that it goes smoothly. Obviously that's not life and that doesn't happen, but I feel like there is so little recognition for that and acknowledgement of that. And so that's a very interesting comment that you made. And somebody actually asked for the podcast name, Anxious Overachievers. Yep, exactly.
Anxious. It's the Anxious Achiever. It's either an HBR or a LinkedIn one. I don't have it in front of me. The episode is probably from about a year ago. It's on my regular podcast subscriptions. I really enjoy it, and it talks about mental health in the workplace. But if you're looking for something for your commute or when you're walking your dogs, I'd highly recommend the Anxious Achiever.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Oh, Allison already put it up there.
Ready to rumble.
He's the best. Okay. So how about walking us through your thoughts on ensuring programs support the employee base? So you've touched a lot on different types of programs and different ways that there can be that support, but let's dive in a little bit deeper into that. And let's talk a little bit about just making sure you have the right program, you have programs in place and they're the right programs. So talk to us about that.
For sure. So earlier we talked about 28% of our employees are indicating that they're experiencing burnout. Also, 23% of adults in the US live with a mental health condition, but more than half, 54.7%, aren't receiving any treatment. If we think about that for a moment, right, it's such a meaningful opportunity for us to be proactive and do something that can not only impact people's lives. I believe in doing things so that they're the right thing to do. I want my people to be engaged and healthy, but also think about the business impact of that, right? If we can have some meaningful ways to get resources in the hands of people who need them, it can make a world of difference for them and their families. And that impacts who they show up to, what they show up like at work. And so I think mental health, really thinking through what is your benefits offering, how accessible is it? A pro tip I would give everyone: navigate it yourself. When you have a team member who's coming to you, or you hear of a situation that's happened to a team member, log into your own EAP and try to find resources on it. I've worked in organizations where it is really hard to find something that on its surface seems pretty straightforward. Death of a sibling, and you search it and you can't really find anything. Navigate it yourself. With our new Headspace EAP benefit or in our Headspace app, I was like, hey, I want to preview those directions. And I went through and I was like, let me see if I can do it and if it's easy to do. And then it said one of the directions was pull up your employee ID. And I was like, oh, people are going to get tripped up on that. How do we show them where to find it easy, right? How do we make it as easy as possible? And the way that you do that is through lived experience of really working through how might these resources work for me. Get familiar with them, click around in them. And I think that's one of the biggest missed opportunities that we have is really being a customer of what we roll out ourselves and saying, how easy is this to navigate? Or if you go and you search a therapist inventory and you look for people who are currently taking appointments and you look, 20 minutes from your office as an example, and you go, there's only one. Does that make sense? Right? How can you you're test driving these resources so you feel comfortable about how they work, and you're also being a customer of your own service and saying, wait a minute, is this actually serving the needs that we have? So I would start there, and then I would understand the needs of your employee base, right? Every person's employee base is going to be different, but you might have kind of a look that you could take by demographics, whether that's age range and different life stages. If you've got people in different geos, look at your employee base and really get a sense for both in the qualitative and quantitative data, what they likely need. If you've got a really big group of new parents, that might be different than people who are consistently taking time away for elder care issues, right? Really understand what your population might need and make sure that your resources offer those support, offer support for that kind of need. And ultimately, I think you can look at some of your aggregated data to know where are you moving in the right direction, where are you perhaps moving not in the right direction. So we talked about unplanned time away as a potential indicator of burnout or people struggling with some health issues. I look at the aggregate amount of leave being taken. Is there anything surprising in there that we might need to take a look at? I look at kind of aggregate EAP data. Is our volume going up? Are there hot topics, right? Sometimes you can get some of these aggregate insights from your benefits broker offer. And we absolutely want to respect the privacy of all of our team members who are using the resources. So that's where aggregate is really important. But what does it tell you about the signals of your organization's health?
Right.
I think those are some really important places to start. But my biggest tip is be your own customer. Try to navigate it yourself. Imagine that you're really you're in a position where you're really struggling, and then try to get into some of this stuff. If it's hard, remove the friction. That's a huge improvement that you can make.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's so key. And I think that is definitely one of the things that is lacking, right? When these things are rolled out or these things are available, and I have been guilty of this myself, not going through it myself to try to navigate it, figure it out, and be able to provide quick answers or information to my team. So I think that is so important and probably overlooked quite often. Yeah. And actually, we've got time for about one more question, if that's okay. And since we were talking about the EAPs and you were talking about the accessibility to those and navigating those yourself, what advice do you have on integrating EAPs and mental health benefits effectively at work? Because we've talked a little bit about what some of those roadblocks can be. So how can you implement those more effectively?
Yeah, I think it starts with leaders, right? Like I think, well, it starts with us. Like we need to be customers of our own product, make sure it's easy to navigate. And then I think you start having leaders use these resources and amplifying them and talking about the benefits that they offer. That can be a super important way to destigmatize these resources and help people understand it's totally normal and part of how I can get support to be the best I can at work. And so I think that like talking about the kinds of resources we offer and making it easy to understand what might each one offer you. What is the EAP versus like our medical plan and how you might find a healthcare provider through there. Just as a quick example, how do we make that so easy to digest that an employee, regardless of their level, could explain it in their own words? That's my key for success, right? If people can understand what the differences are and explain it in their own words, that's how we know that they're ready. My strong guess is that like very, very few companies are at that level yet. And I think it can start with like leaders being well versed in it and having like toolkits or ways to talk about it in team meetings. But ultimately, I think like when leaders start to role model, these are ways resources helped me, or like, hey, I clicked around in our EAP. I'm so sorry to hear about what happened. I found this resource and I wanted to share this like little 2-pager with you. I thought it might be helpful. And I just wanted to remind you that this resource is available. It can go so far in helping people feel cared for, and also making sure that they have the support they need. But it all comes down to, do we know what's available where? Is it easy to get to? And have we created a culture in an organization where getting the help you need is normal and everyone wants people to be well?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you're spot on with that, most definitely. I wish that we had time for a last question, but I think we're gonna probably end it here. I just want to thank you. Your knowledge, expertise, wisdom, and experience has been incredible for this conversation, and this can be a really difficult conversation to talk about. There's a lot of things that go into this, so thank you very much for all of that.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you got something out of it. We appreciate you.
Definitely. Have a great day.
Have a good one.